Thief of Time, Part 8. Tick. There were lots of places like the warehouse. There always are in every old city, no matter how valuable the building land is. Sometimes space just gets lost. A workshop is built and then another one beside it. Factories and storerooms and sheds and temporary lean-tos crawl toward one another, meet and merge. Spaces between outside walls are roofed with tar paper. Odd-shaped bits of ground are colonized by someone's nailing up a bit of wall and cutting a doorway. Old doorways are masked by piles of lumber or new tool racks. Old men who knew what was where move on and die, just like the flies who punctuate the thick cobwebs on the grubby windows. Young men in this noisome world of whirring lathes and paint shops and cluttered workbenches don't have the time to explore. And so there are spaces like this, a small warehouse with a crusted skylight that no fewer than 4 factory owners think is owned by one of the other 3 when they think about it all. In fact, each of them own one wall, and certainly no one recalls who roofed the space. Beyond the walls, on all 4 sides, men and dwarves bend iron, saw planks, make string, and turn screws. But in here is a silence known only to the rats. The air moved for the first time in years. Dust ball rolled across the floor. Little motes sparkled and spun in the light that forced its way down from the roof. In the surrounding area, invisible and subtle, matter began to move. It came from workmen's sandwiches and gutter dirt and pigeon feathers, an atom here, a molecule there, and streamed unheeded into the center of the space. It spiraled. Eventually it became, after passing through some strange and ancient and horrible shapes, Lady Lechon. She staggered but managed to stay upright. Other auditors also appeared, and as they did so, it seemed for the first time that they had never really not been there. The dead greyness of the light merely took on shapes. They emerged like ships from a fog. You stare at the fog, and suddenly part of the fog is Hull, which has been there all along, and now there is nothing for it but the race for the lifeboats. Lady Lechon said, "I cannot keep doing this. It is too painful." One said, "Ah, can you tell us what pain is like? We have often wondered." No, I don't think I can. It is a body thing. It is not pleasant. From now on, I will retain the body." One said, "That could be dangerous." Lady Lechon shrugged. "We've been through that before. It's only a matter of appearance," she said, "and it is remarkable how much easier it is to deal with humans in this form." One said, "You shrugged, and you are talking with your mouth, a hole for food and air." "Yes, it's remarkable, isn't it?" Lady Lechon's body found an old crate, pulled it over, and sat on it. She hardly had to think about muscle movements at all. One said, "You aren't eating, are you?" "As of yet, no." One said, "As yet? That raises the whole dreadful subject of orifices." One said, "And how did you learn to shrug?" "It comes with the body," said her ladyship. "We never realized this, did we? Most of the things it does, it appears to do pretty automatically. Standing upright takes no effort whatsoever. The whole business gets easier every time." The body shifted position slightly and crossed its legs. Amazing, she thought. It did it to be comfortable. I didn't have to think about it at all. We never guessed. One said, "There will be questions." The auditors hated questions. They hated them almost as much as they hated decisions, and they hated decisions almost as much as they hated the idea of the individual personality. But what they hated most was things moving around at random. "Believe me, everything will be fine," said Lady Lechon. "We will not be breaking any of the rules after all. After that, all that will happen is that time will stop. Everything thereafter will be neat, alive, but not moving. Tidy." One said, "And we could get the filing finished." "Exactly," said Lady Lechon, "and he wants to do it. That is the strange thing. He hardly thinks about the consequences." One said, "Splendid." There was one of those pauses when no one is quite ready to speak yet, and then one said, "Tell us, what is it like?" "What is what like?" One said, "Being insane, being human." Strange, disorganized, several levels of thinking go on at once. There are things that we have no word for. For example, the idea of eating seems now to have an attraction. The body tells me this. One said, "An attraction? As in gravity?" "Yes, one is drawn toward food." One said, "Food in large masses? Even in quite small amounts?" One said, "But eating is simply a function. What is the attraction of performing a function? Surely the knowledge that is necessary for continued survival is sufficient." "I cannot say," said Lady Leshon. One auditor said, "You persist in using a personal pronoun." And one said, "And you have not died. To be an individual is to live, and to live is to die." "Yes, I know, but it is essential for humans to see the personal pronoun. It divides the universe into two parts, the darkness behind the eyes where the little voice is, and everything else. It is a horrible feeling. It's like being questioned all the time." One said, "What is the little voice?" "Sometimes thinking is like talking to another person, but that person is also you." She could tell this disturbed some of the auditors. "I do not wish to continue in this way any longer than necessary," she added, and realized she had lied. One said, "We do not blame you." Lady Leshon nodded. The auditors could see into human minds. They could see the pop and sizzle of thoughts, but they could not read them. They could see the energies flow from node to node. They could see the brain glittering like a hawk's watch decoration. But what they couldn't see was what was happening. So they built one. It was the logical thing to do. They'd used human agents before because early on they worked out that there were many humans who could do anything for a sufficient amount of gold. This was puzzling because gold did not seem to the auditors to hold any significant value for the human body. It needed iron and copper and zinc, but only the most minute traces of gold. Therefore, they reasoned, this was further evidence that the humans that required it were flawed, and this was why attempts to make use of them were ultimately doomed. But why were they flawed? Building a human being was quite easy. The auditors knew exactly how to move the matter around. The trouble was that the result didn't do anything but lie there and eventually decompose. This was annoying, since clearly human beings without any special training or education seemed to be able to make working replicas quite easy. Then they learned that they could make a human body which worked if an auditor was inside of it. There were, of course, huge risks to this. Death was one of them. The auditors avoided death by never going so far as to actually get a life. They strove to be as indistinguishable as hydrogen atoms, and with none of the latter's joie de vivre, some luckless auditor might be risking death by operating the body. But lengthy consultation decided that if the driver took care and liaised at all times with the best of the auditors, this was minimal and worth taking considering the overall goal. They built a woman. It was a logical choice. After all, while men wielded more obvious power than women, they often did so at the expense of personal danger, and no auditor liked the prospect of personal danger at all. Beautiful women often achieved great things, on the other hand, merely by simply smiling, especially when they smiled at powerful men. The subject of beauty caused the auditors a lot of difficulty. It made no sense at a molecular level, but research turned up the fact that the woman in the picture, A Woman Holding Ferret, by Leonard of Qa'Rajh, was considered the epitome of beauty, and so they based Lady Leshon on that. They had made changes, of course. The face in the picture was asymmetrical and full of minor flaws, which they had very carefully removed. The result would have been successful beyond the auditors' wildest dreams, that is, if they ever dreamed at all. Now that they had their stalking horse, their reliable human, anything was now possible to them. They were learning fast, or at least collecting data, which they considered to be the same thing as learning. So was Lady Lishon. She had been a human for 2 weeks, 2 astonishing and shocking weeks. Whoever could have guessed that her brain operated like this, or that colors had meaning that went way, way beyond spectral analysis? How could she even begin to describe the blueness of actual blue, or how much thinking the brain did just by itself? It was terrifying. Half of the time her thoughts seemed to not be her own. She had been quite surprised to find that she did not want to tell the other auditors about this. She did not want to tell them a lot of things. And she didn't have to. She had power. Oh, over Jeremy, that was not in question, and it was now, she had to admit, rather worrying. It was causing her body to do things by itself, like blush. But she had power over the other auditors too. She made them nervous. Of course, she wanted the project to work. It was their goal, a tidy, predictable universe where everything stayed in its place. If the auditors dreamed, this would be another dream. Except, the young man had smiled at her in a nervous, worrying way, and the universe was turning out to be a lot more chaotic than even the auditors had ever suspected it to be. And a lot of chaos was also happening inside Lady Lishon's head. Tick. Lutze and Lopsang passed through Bongfot and Long Nap like ghosts in twilight. People and animals were bluish statues and were not, said Lutze, to be touched under any circumstances. Lutze stocked his travel bag with more food from some of the houses, making sure to leave little copper tokens in their place. It means we're obliged to them, he said, filling Lopsang's back as well. The next monk through here might have to give someone a minute or two. A minute or two isn't much. For a dying woman to say goodbye to her children, it is actually a lifetime, said Lutze. Is it not written, every second counts? Let's go. I'm tired, Sweeper. I'd say every second counts. But everybody has to sleep. Yes, but not yet, Lutze insisted. We can rest in the caves down at Songset. Can't fold time while you're asleep, see? Can we use these spinners? In theory, yes. In theory. They could wind out time for us that we'd only sleep for a few seconds. They are for emergencies only, said Lutze bluntly. How do you define an emergency, Sweeper? An emergency is when I decide it's time to use a clockwork spinner designed by Q, Wonder Boy, a life belt for saving your life. That's where I trust an uncalibrated, unblessed spinner powered by springs when I have to. I know, Q says. Lopsang blinked and shook his head. Lutze grabbed his arm. You felt something again? Like having a tooth out in my brain, said Lopsang, rubbing his head. He pointed. It came from over there. A pain came from over there, said Lutze. He glared at the boy. But we never found a way to detecting which way. He stopped and rummaged in his sack. Then he used the sack to sweep snow off a flat boulder. We'll see what. Glass house. This time Lopsang could concentrate on the tones that filled the air. Wet finger on wine glass? Well, you could start there, but the finger would have to be the finger of a god on the glass of some celestial sphere. And the wonderful complex shifting tones did not simply fill the air, they were the air. The moving blur beyond the walls was getting closer now. It was just beyond the closest wall, then found the open doorway and vanished. Something was behind Lopsang. He turned. There was nothing there that he could see, but he felt movement, and for just a moment something warm brushed his cheek. The sand says, said Lutze, tipping a small bag onto the rock. The colored grains bounced and spread. They did not have the sensitivity of the mandala itself, but there was a blue bloom in the chaos. He gave Lopsang a sharp look. It's been proved that no one can do what you just did, he said. We've never found any way of detecting where a disturbance in time is actually being caused. Sorry, Lopsang raised a hand to his cheek. It was damp. What did I do? It makes a huge... Lutze stopped. Ankh-Morpork's that way, he said. Did you know that? No. Anyway, you said you had a feeling things would happen in Ankh-Morpork. Yes, but I've had a lifetime of experience in cynicism. Lutze scooped the sand back into its bag. You're just gifted. Come on. 4 more seconds, sliced thinly, took them below the snow line, into scree slopes that slid under their feet, and then through alder forests not much taller than themselves. and it was there they met the hunters gathered around in a wide circle. The men did not pay them much attention. Monks were rather commonplace in these parts. The leader, or at least the one who was shouting, and this is usually the leader, did look up and waved them past. Lutze stopped, though, and looked amiably at the thing in the center of the circle. It looked back at him. "Good catch," he said. "What are you going to do now, boys?" "Is it any business of yours?" said the leader. No, just asking," said Lutze. "You boys up from the lowlands, yes?" "Yeah, you'd be amazed what you can get for catching one of these." "Yes," said Lutze, "you would be amazed." Lopsang looked at the hunters. There was more than a dozen of them, heavily armed, and watching Lutze carefully. $900 for a good pelt, and another 1,000 for the feet," said their leader. "That much, eh?" said Lutze. "That's a lot of money for a pair of feet." "That's because they're big," said the hunter. "And you know what they say about men with big feet, eh? They need bigger shoes." "Yeah, right," said the hunter, grinning. "Load of nonsense, really, but there's rich old boys with young wives over on the counterweight continent who'll pay a fort for a powdered yeti foot." "And there was me thinking they are a protected species," said Lutze, leaning his broom against the tree. "They're only a kind of troll. Who's going to protect them out here?" said the hunter. Behind him, the local guides, who did know Rule 1, turned and ran. "Me," said Lutze. "Oh," said the hunter, and this time the grin was nasty. "You don't even have a weapon." He turned to look at the fleeing guides. "You're one of the weird monks from up in the valleys, aren't you?" "That's right," said Lutze. "Small, grinning, weird monk, totally unarmed." "Why, there's 15 of us," said the hunter. "Well armed, as you can see." "It is very important that you are all heavily armed," said Lutze, pulling his sleeves out of the way. "It makes it fairer." He rubbed his hands together. No one seemed inclined to retreat. Any of you boys heard any rules?" he said after a while. "Rules?" said one of the hunters. "What rules?" "Oh, you know," said Lutze. "Rules like Rule 2, say, or Rule 27, any kind of rules of that sort of description." The leading hunter frowned. "What in damnation are you talking about, mister?" Not so much a mister as a small, rather knowing, elderly, entirely unarmed, weird monk," said Lutze. "I'm just wondering if there's anything about the situation that makes you, slightly nervous?" "You mean us being well armed and outnumbering you and you backing away like that?" said one of the hunters. Yes," said Lutze. "Perhaps we're up against a cultural thing here. I know, how about this?" He stood on one leg, wobbling a little, and raised both hands. "Aye, aye, ho, ye, no? No? Anyone?" There was a certain amount of bewilderment amongst the hunters. "Is it a book?" said one who was slightly more intellectual than the rest of them. "How many words?" "What I'm trying to find out here," said Lutze, "is whether you have any idea what happens when a lot of big armed men try to attack a small, elderly, unarmed monk." "To the best of my knowledge," said the intellectual, "he turns out to be a very unlucky monk." Lutze shrugged. "Oh, well," he said, "then we'll just have to try it the hard way." A blur in the air hit the intellectual on the back of the neck. The leader stirred to step forward and learned too late that his bootlaces were tied together. Men reached for knives that were no longer in their sheath, for swords that were inexplicably leaning against a tree on the far side of the clearing. Legs were swept from underneath them, invisible elbows connected with soft parts of their bodies. Blows rained out of thin, empty air. Those who fell down learned to stay that way. A raised head would hurt. The group was reduced to men lying humbly on the ground, groaning gently. It was then that they heard a low, rhythmic sound. The yeti was clapping. It had to be a slow hand clap because of the creature's long arms. But when the hands met, they'd come a long way and were glad to see one another. They echoed around the mountains. Lutze reached down and raised the leader's chin. "If you have enjoyed this afternoon, please tell your friends," he said. "Tell them to remember rule number 1. He let the chin go and walked across to the yeti and bowed. "Shall I release you, sir, or would you like to do it yourself?" he said. The yeti stood up, looked down at the cruel iron trap around one leg, and concentrated for a moment. At the end of the moment, the yeti was a little way from the trap, which was still set and almost hidden in the leaves. "Well done," said Lutze. "Methodical, very smooth. Headed down to the lowlands?" The yeti had to bend double to bring its long face close to Lutze. Yes, it said. What do you want to do with these people? The Yeti looked around at the cowering hunters. It being dark soon, it said. No guides, no. They got torches, said Lucy. Ha, ha, said the Yeti, and it said it rather than laughed. That's good. Torches show up at night. Yes, can you give us a lift? It is rather important. You and that whizzing kid I ain't seen there? A patch of grey air at the edge of the clearing became Lopsang out of breath. He dropped the broken branch he'd been holding. The lad is called Lopsang. I'm training him up, said Lucy. Looks like you gotta hurry before you're running out of things he don't know, said the Yeti. Ha, ha. Sweeper, what were you? Lopsang began hurrying forward. Lucy put his finger to his lips. Not in front of our fallen friends, he said. I'm looking for Rule 1 to become a lot better respected in these parts as a result of this day's work. But I had to do all the... We must be going, said Lucy, waving him into silence. I reckon we can snooze quite happily while our friend here carries us. Lopsang glanced up at the Yeti and then back to Lucy, and then back to the Yeti. It was tall. In some ways, it was like the trolls he'd met in the city, but rolled out thin. It was more than twice as high as he was, and most of the extra height was skinny legs and arms. The body was a ball of fur, and the feet were indeed rather huge. If he could have got out of the trap at any, he began. You are the apprentice, right? Said Lucy. Me, I'm the master. I'm sure I wrote that down somewhere. But you said you weren't going to say any of those know-it-all. Remember Rule 1. Oh, and pick up one of those swords. We'll need it in a minute. Okay, Your Honor. The Yeti picked them up gently and firmly, cradled them in the crook of each arm, and strode away through the snow and the trees. Snug, eh? Said Lucy after a while. Their wool is spun out of rock in some way, but it's pretty comfy. There was no answer from the other arm. I spent some time with the Yetis, said Lucy. Amazing people. They taught me a thing or two. Valuable stuff. For is it not written, we live and learn? Silence, a kind of sullen, deliberate silence, reigned. I'd think myself lucky if I was a boy your age, actually being carried by an actual Yeti. A lot of people back in the valley have never even seen one. Mind you, they don't come that close to settlements anymore, not since that rumor about their feet got around. Lucy got the feeling that he was taking part in a dialogue of one. Something you want to say, is there? Well, as a matter of fact, yes, there is, actually, said Lopsang. You let me do all the work back there. You weren't going to do anything. I was making sure I had their full attention, said Lucy smoothly. Why? So that you didn't get their full attention. I had every confidence in you, of course. A good master gives the pupil an opportunity to demonstrate his skills. And what would you have done if I hadn't been here? Pray? Yes, probably, said Lucy. What? But I expect I would have found some way to use their stupidity against them, said Lucy. There generally is. Is there a problem here? Well, I just thought you'd be teaching me more, that's all. I'm teaching you things all the time, said Lucy. You might not be learning them, of course. Oh, I see, said Lopsang. Very smug. Are you going to try to teach me about this Yeti then, and why you made me bring a sword? You'll need the sword to learn about Yetis, said Lucy. How? In a few minutes we'll find a nice place to stop, and you can cut his head off. Is that all right by you, sir? Yes, sure, said the Yeti. In the second scroll of When the Eternally Surprised, a story is written concerning one day when the apprentice Clodpool, in a rebellious mood, approached Wen and spoke thusly. Master, what is the difference between humanistic monastic system of belief in which wisdom is sought by many means of an apparently nonsensical system of questions and answers and a lot of mystic gibberish made up on the spur of the moment? Wen considered this for some time and at last said, a fish. And Clodpool went away, satisfied. Tick. The code of Igor's was very strict. Never contradict. It was no part of an Igor's job to say things like, no thir, that's an artery. The master was always right. Never complain. An Igor would never say, but that's 1,000 miles away. Never make personal remarks. No Igor would dream of saying anything like, I should have something done about that laugh if I was you. And never, ever ask a question. Admittedly, Igor knew that men never asked big questions. Would Thur like a cup of tea around now was fine, but what do you need 100 virgins for? Or where do you expect me to find a brain at this time of night? Was not. And Igor stood for loyal, dependable, discreet service with a smile, or at least the sort of lopsided grin, or possibly just a curved scar in the right place on the face. And it has to be said that there was nothing intrinsically evil about Igors themselves. They just didn't pass judgment on other people. Admittedly, that was because if you worked for werewolves and vampires and people who looked on surgery as modern art rather than science, passing judgment would mean that you'd never have time to get anything done. And therefore, Igor was getting worried. Things were wrong, and when an Igor thinks that, they are really wrong. Great difficulty lay in getting this across to Jeremy without breaking the code, though. Igor was increasingly ill at ease with someone so clearly stark, staring, sane. Nevertheless, he tried. "Her ladyship will be along again this morning," he said, as they watched yet another crystal grow in its solution. "And I know you know that," he thought, "because you smoothed your hair down with soap and put on a clean shirt." "Yes," said Jeremy, "I wish we had better progress to report. However, I'm sure we are nearly there now." "Yes, that's very strange, isn't it?" said Igor, seizing the opening. "Strange, you say?" "Call me Mr. Silly, sir, but it always seems to me that we're always on the point of success when her ladyship's pay us a visit. But when she's gone, we experience new difficulties." "What are you suggesting, Igor?" "Me, sir? I'm not a suggestive person, sir. But last time part of the divider array had cracked. You know, I think that was because of dimensional instability." "Yes, sir." "Why are you giving me that funny look, Igor?" Igor shrugged. That is, one shoulder was momentarily a bit higher than the other one. "Goes with the face, sir. She'd hardly pay us so handsomely and then sabotage the project, would she? Why would she do that?" Igor hesitated. He had his back right up against the code now. "I am still wondering if she is all she seems, sir." "Sorry, I didn't quite catch that." "I wonder if we can trust her, sir," said Igor patiently. "Oh, go and calibrate the complexity resonator, will you?" Grumbling, Igor obeyed. The second time that he followed their benefactor, she'd gone to a hotel. Next day, she'd headed for a large house in Kingsway where she'd been met by an oily man who made a great play of presenting her with a key. Igor had followed the oleaginous man back to his office in a nearby street where, because there are few things that are kept from a man with a face full of stitches, he learned that she'd just bought the lease for a very large bar of gold. After that, Igor had resorted to an ancient Ankh-Morpork tradition and paid someone to follow her ladyship. There was enough gold in the workshops, heavens knew, and the master took no interest in it at all. Lady LeSean went to the opera. Lady LeSean went to art galleries. Lady LeSean was living life to the fullest, except that Lady LeSean, as far as Igor could determine, never visited restaurants and had no food delivered to the house at all. Lady LeSean was up to something. Igor could spot this easily. Lady LeSean also did not appear in Twerp's Peerage or the Almanac de Gothic or any of the other reference books that Igor had checked as a matter of course, which meant that she had something to hide. Of course, he had worked for masters who occasionally had a great deal to hide, sometimes in deep holes and usually around midnight, but this situation was morally different for two reasons. Her ladyship wasn't his master, Jeremy was, and that was where his loyalty lay, and Igor had decided it was morally different. Now he reached the glass clock. It looked almost complete. Jeremy had designed a mechanism to go behind the face, and Igor had got it made up all in glass. It had nothing whatsoever to do with the other mechanism, which flickered away down behind the pendulum and took up a disconcertingly small amount of room now that it was assembled. Quite a few of its parts were no longer sharing the same set of dimensions as the rest of it, but the clock had a face, and a face needed hands, and so the glass pendulum swung, and the glass hands moved, and told normal everyday time. The tick had a slightly bell-like quality to it, as though someone was flicking a wine glass with but the tip of a fingernail. Iger looked at his hand-me-down hands. They were also beginning to worry him. Now that the glass clock looked like a clock, they began to shake every time Iger came near it. Tick.